suffer is something that is internal, and it's really not my business to tell anybody else that they're suffering. I could say that about myself, I'm really suffering today. But I don't want to be viewed by other people in general as a sufferer. I want people to see the strong parts about me, the good parts about me. I think it's belittling and wrong to call someone a sufferer.
Welcome to Migraine Again, helping you eat, breathe, survive, thrive, and engage better despite migraine. If you or someone you know struggles with migraine often, join us for today's insightful conversation. Now here's your host, founder and managing editor of MigraineAgain.com and co-host of the Migraine World Summit, Paula Dumas.
Remember that rhyme from childhood? Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me? Yet did you know that the words that we use about migraine have a powerful and sometimes hurtful effect on the critical aspects of medical care, research funding, and stigma surrounding migraine? Insights from today's guest may actually change the way we all talk about migraine. We'll be back to meet him right after this.
Support for Migraine Again and today's podcast is brought to you by SpeakYourMigraine.com. Developed by Amgen and Novartis, SpeakYourMigraine.com gives people with migraine a voice, combining facts and shared experiences to break stigmas and paint a clearer picture of migraine. You're listening to Migraine Again. For show notes and resources from this episode, check out our program page on migraineagain.com. And now, once again, here's your host, Paula Dumas.
A passionate advocate for people with all types of headache, today's guest, Dr. William Young, uses the power of the right words at the right time to fight for people whose lives have been marked by migraine. As president of the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy and the director of the inpatient program at Jefferson Headache Center in Philadelphia, Dr. William Young is one of the world's leading migraine clinicians, researchers, and headache advocates. Board certified in neurology, psychiatry, and headache medicine, Dr. Young fights on Capitol Hill for research funding and speaks out on national media about the stigma of migraine. Dr. Young, welcome to Migraine Again.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
We're delighted to have you. So let's start this conversation with some historical context. Where did the term migraine originate?
Migraine was recognized but not called migraine for thousands of years. But we believe that migraine comes from hemicrania in Latin around the year 200, and that it was after that the word evolved into migraine. And that's what we're stuck with. But migraine's been, as far as we can tell, pretty much the same throughout the history of man.
You mean the condition has been the same over the history of man?
Yes.
So how has the term then evolved over the years to its current use?
Well, it was used like any other disease through the Middle Ages and through the Renaissance. And migraine was it wasn't very precisely defined, but it was the thick headache. People knew that. So they recognized that it was a lot more than a migraine headache. It was a migraine. And I think that's pretty much, stuck with us, and appropriately so. I think problems came later on. We still use the word migraine, but the stigma got attached to migraine somewhere around the 18th century. And since that time, the disease is properly named as migraine, but the stigma has been attached to the word.
Okay, so let's talk more about that stigma. It is a highly stigmatized condition, and I think much more so than even people who have it often understand, until you tell somebody you have migraine and then you start to feel it, right? So what are the 3 reasons that we have stigma against migraine?
Well, I've thought about this, and I think the first reason is the invisibility. People don't see it. They don't know what you're going through. And people have learned, because of the stigma, to keep it quiet and not to, and to duck. And I think that has perpetuated the stigma. The second reason is what I call the curse of the people with mild migraine. I think that one of the problems that people have severe and disabling migraine is, some people are so ignorant to believe that what they have, which is much less severe, equates to what another person has who may, have completely disabling daily migraine, unable to do anything but lie motionless in bed for day after day, and they're not the same. And because of that wide variation, people with less imagination aren't empathetic or understanding about people who have a more severe form of the disease. Mm-hmm. And then the third thing is what I call the ugly migraine meme, which is around the 1700s, people started to look at migraine as a disease of women who were overly sensitive and trying to escape from their social responsibilities. There's a statement, all the women of Paris are incapacitated by migraine and they're not doing what they should do. And not only the patients were looked upon and made fun of in this way, but the doctors who took care of them were viewed as enablers and, incompetent people who were enabling this behavioral problem of women. And ever since then, there's been this recurrent theme and negative view of people with migraine. And we're kind of stuck with that. So my belief is that we have to directly confront that and fight that.
I agree. Let's go back to the first one, which was invisibility. So many people with migraine, their symptoms, whether it be visual disturbances, neck pain, nausea, you can't tell that they're experiencing those things. You can't tell that they're incredibly sensitive to smell. You might see their eyes watering. But many of the symptoms are invisible until they throw up on your nice new shoes, of course. Yes. And so I have faked feeling well, and I know many people with migraine who have faked feeling well because they're just tired of talking about it. Yeah. And they know that they're misunderstood when they raise it and they say, you know what, I told my boss that I had a migraine and he said, oh, just, suck it up. You'll get over it. I had a headache last week too. And look, I'm here, right?
Yeah, I've heard of a patient who's quoted now who said, I've never faked having a migraine. Every day I fake not having a migraine.
Right. And there are many other invisible illnesses where people do not understand because you look perfectly fine on the outside. And I know when on my bad days, I will oftentimes try to make myself look better than usual to see if I can kind of psych myself into feeling better than I know that I actually do. So I'll put on lipstick, I'll brush my hair, I'll just try to fake it till I make it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I can relate to that. The curse of the mild migraine is another interesting issue. As a neurologist, what other conditions do you see where it's a spectrum disorder, where somebody could have a very mild version of it or a very severe version of it?
Well, almost any disease kind of fits into that. Autism obviously is the spectrum disorder that we think about. Somebody can have perfectly normal intelligence and, function very well and have minor social social problems or barriers, and someone else is nonverbal and rocks in a chair all day. Mm-hmm. And they're both, within the spectrum of autism. Epilepsy can be, seizures only at night from the age of 14 to 16, or it can be every single day with mental retardation and, and having to wear a helmet because it's dangerous to be standing. Mm-hmm. So many diseases, but we accommodate that. You know, if someone who had breast cancer cured by a lumpectomy and never needed chemotherapy or radiation, you know, met a woman who had breast cancer through every bone in her body and a 3-month life expectancy, we would be outraged if they were, you know, insensitive or mean to the person with, you know, stage 4 breast cancer. And yet we're not when somebody is that way and compares their migraine to someone who has much more severe migraine.
That is a great illustration. I think a lot more understanding and empathy within the broader migraine community of anybody who has any form of this disease would help.
Right. So I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, perhaps, but I think that for the ignorance, you know, for people who don't understand migraine because everybody's been hiding it from them, you know, we need to make ourselves visible. We need to educate, and if they forget or don't get it, we educate them again. I think we should be kind and patient and persistent. But for the person, you know, who's the ignorant, non-empathic person with mild migraine, I think they need a little bit of spanking. A good verbal spanking is appropriate, in my opinion.
All right, verbal spanking, great idea. You first. So how does the way that we talk about it undermine us getting the respect and understanding and empathy that we crave?
Well, I think that there are things that we can bring into the language that, you know, maybe we've forgotten, and things that we cannot say that perhaps are bad habits that we've developed over the centuries, really. First of all, I think it's worth calling a migraine a disease, at least when it's bad. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you have something that's a nuisance and you don't want to call that a disease, I'm fine with that. It's a condition or a disorder. But if you have something that truly affects your quality of life, that may impact your work or your social, that can progress and become worse, that has to be managed chronically, it's a chronic disease, and call it a disease. And I don't think we should run away from that word. We should embrace it.
Well, we're going to come back to that in just a minute. I'm Paula Dumas, and you are listening to the Migraine Again podcast with our guest today, Dr. William Young, who's the president of the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. And when we come back, we'll talk about how words affect our ability to find a cure for migraine.
Just a quick thanks to Amgen and Novartis, the makers of SpeakYourMigraine.com. Go to SpeakYourMigraine.com on your computer, tablet, or smartphone to take the Migraine Impact Assessment Test so you can understand how much of an impact migraine has on your life. Hey, we'd like to hear about your life with migraine and offer some help and encouragement if we can. If you've got a question about migraine, we'll do our best to answer it and might even include it on one of our upcoming podcasts. If you'd like to submit a question, just go to our website, migraineagain.com/question.
We're back with Dr. William Young talking about fighting migraine with words. So, Dr. Young, migraine is seriously underfunded relative to its burden on society. How does our language impact our ability to raise funding for medical research?
Well, I think that our language promotes or fights against the stigma of migraine. And, you know, it's our language, and we are the stakeholders in our disease, and we should be able to choose how we talk about it. And, you know, it's clear that stigmatized diseases get less attention from NIH, less scientific attention, less attention from and respect from insurance companies, mm-hmm. and less research from pharma companies.
What would be an example of another stigmatized disease that doesn't get much attention or support from all of those sources?
It used to be depression before they took things into their own hands and started to change the world for people who have depression. So that's an example where it was very stigmatized and where they've made it better. There's psychiatric diseases have been stigmatized for a long time. Certainly diseases that affect poor people, diseases where people blame the person for giving themselves the disease, like the classic example is lung cancer, which causes more deaths than breast cancer and yet gets about a third of the funding of breast cancer. So those are some examples where the stigma influences both research and treatment.
I recall looking at a stat that said that migraine got about as much funding as Arctic disease from the National Institute of Health. That's kind of underfunded relative to its incidence in society, right?
Correct. If it was properly funded, it would get between 10 and 15 times as much as it's currently getting. So, and I think that much of that disparity is directly attributable to the stigma of the disease.
And how we talk about it, because we'll get into the specific words in just a minute, but the words that we use to describe it can make people minimize and think that this is really not that big of a deal. Right.
One example is migraine headache. So one of our recommendations, my recommendations, is that we just say migraine. And if we want to emphasize the headache, the pain part of migraine among all the many symptoms, just say the headache of migraine.
And to be specific, as a physician, you can have migraine without headache, right?
Correct. You can have an aura. In fact, you can have all the same. You could have the nausea and the light sensitivity without the pain. And we see that all the time. And then there are all the symptoms that outlast the migraine, the brain fog and light sensitivity and scalp sensitivity that can persist long after the migraine pain has resolved.
Yeah. So what do you think is the best way to refer to people who battle this perfectly evil beast that we call migraine?
I think we just say a person with migraine. One of the other things that people with migraine are called that I want to battle against is migraineur, migraine sufferer, and migraine type person. They don't say that gratefully very much anymore, but certainly 15 years ago, 25 years ago, I would hear that fairly frequently, let's say from a physician. She's really not a migraine type person, but she has really bad migraine. And that would be, I find that quite offensive. Migraineur is something that I think physicians are so used to when they think it's okay, and it sounds a little bit better than, other disease-specific names. But it's fairly clear that you don't want to imbue the entire character of a person who has migraine with their disease. So it's not considered proper to call somebody an epileptic or a schizophrenic. They're a person with epilepsy or a person with schizophrenia, and so, give us the dignity of being people who have a disease, not being the disease.
Right. I remember meeting somebody at a party, and they said, "Oh, you're Leslie's friend with migraine," as if that was the only thing that defined me.
Yeah.
Made me crazy. Yep.
Exactly.
So we are much, much more than our disease, and it doesn't define us. It's just one aspect of our personhood, is the point of people with migraine, right?
Exactly. Now, I do have one other strong suggestion about migraine, the words we use, and that's to say, whenever possible, say migraine and not migraines.
Mm-hmm.
Last month I had 2 migraines. That's proper. But I have migraine. It's a long-lasting chronic condition. It has attacks. We'll talk about my attacks. But I think it's undermining, and it takes away from, it emphasizes this part of it, that about having attacks, as opposed to, it's a disease that, is there all the time. You don't have asthmas. You have asthma, and then you have asthma attacks.
That's a great point. And some of the research that Dr. Todd Schwed of the Mayo Clinic shared during the Migraine World Summit this year, he talked about the hypersensitive migraine brain and how what he called the interictal period between attacks, where the brain was still hypersensitive, where you still had that, sensitivity to smell, and you still had some of the nausea and some of the other, I think sensitivity to light was another big finding that he had in his research.
Correct.
Shows that, migraine is ever present. You just may have some disabling attacks that make you stop your life, but you have it in between.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And so those are fairly simple, easy ways to change how we speak about it. And I think if we as a community can decide to change how we talk, this will help. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do. I still hear myself, and I think about this every day, and I still hear myself making a mistake, but over time I'm making fewer misspoken words, and I'm getting better at it, and I think I'm communicating better, and I'm communicating something about the disease that is truer than when I used to speak about it that other way.
And ultimately more respectful, and helps us accomplish what we're all trying to do, which is get more funding for more research so we can get to a cure, so we can be relieved of this terrible demon.
Exactly. There is one more language issue that is perhaps a little bit more controversial in some circles. I don't like medication overuse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's blaming of the patient. To say that they have medication overuse headache, but that is the proper term listed in the International Classification of Headache Disorders.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's stigmatizing. It's wrong. I've asked them to change it, and I'm going to be asking again and again until they do. For the time being, I'm recommending rebound headache, mm-hmm. or medication adaptation headache, both of which stress the mechanism and don't assign the blame to the patient as in medication overuse, or in the why don't we call it medication overprescription headache and blame the doctor?
I like that. I like that because the people who are in that, and I have been there, believe that they're just following their doctor's orders. They said, I did everything my doctor told me to do, and now I can't seem to crack this.
Right. So I'm trying to get that word changed.
Mm-hmm. I think even the tone that we refer to, the adjectives we apply to people with migraine matters, and the way we frame our own story and our identity. So a society can make you feel like you're just a wimp,
Yeah.
or that maybe you're faking, you can't handle it, you can't handle the stress. But the more people I have met who have migraine, the more I am convinced that these people, especially those who are chronic, are courageous warriors getting up every day and fighting this horrible disease.
And it's funny you should say that, because this is exactly the third way that we should be fighting against the stigma of migraine.
Mm-hmm.
So just to recap, educate those who don't understand, spank those who have mild headache and, are critical of people with severe headache. And then I think we have to replace this ugly idea that came in the middle 1700s about, the weak and, characterologically, weak and woman with migraine, and actually show how heroic people are, as they fight through this disease that's mysterious, that doesn't have good treatments, and how they find, the best solution that they can in their lives with the tools that they have, and generally get through with a great deal of dignity and grace, and sometimes with a little bit of humor.
Humor helps.
Yeah.
It does. So if you agree or disagree with these ideas, we would love to hear from you. You can add your own words and ideas to the comment section under this episode on migraineagain.com. And when we return, we're going to talk with Dr. Young about a few words to consider striking from your vocabulary.
A quick thanks to our advertisers, Amgen and Novartis, who have developed the SpeakYourMigraine.com website, where you can read stories, gather tools, and resources to help change the migraine conversation. It's time to turn private pain into collective change at SpeakYourMigraine.com. This is Migraine Again, encouraging and empowering you in your battle against migraine because you deserve to feel better. You can hear this conversation again or share it with someone who might like to hear it by going to migraineagain.com. And now, once again, here's Paula.
Our guest today is Dr. William Young, discussing how we talk and write about migraine. So, Dr. Young, a lot of people actually aren't offended very much by these words. What's the danger of just letting things stay as they are?
Well, for stigma itself is an additional burden. So if we use stigmatizing language and we allow people to, portray us in a stigmatizing way, that's a tax that we pay directly. And the way it works is kind of recognized by social scientists as something like this. There's enacted stigma. So people say to you, you're just another migraineur who's trying to get out of work, or whatever disgusting thing that they say. And, well, maybe the first time it doesn't change that. If you hear that 100, 1,000 times, it actually inevitably goes in and becomes a part of you. And there's a decrement in self-esteem, and there's a tax in terms of your mood and anxiety, and it's going to be internalized. Mm-hmm. So we need to recognize it. We need to fight from having it enacted upon us, and then we need to strengthen ourselves so we internalize as little as possible of that enacted stigma.
Mm-hmm. Good counsel. That's the psychiatry board certification coming out as you're talking. So does it matter if we call it a disease, a disorder, or a condition?
I think that the way we use language now, we will respect somebody with a disease more than a disorder, and a condition is less serious. And for so many of my patients, this is a disease. Every day this disease is, affecting their brain function. The pain elements in the brain are changing physically over time because of these repeated attacks of migraine. This is a disease, and let's call it let's not try to pretty it up or lessen it like everybody else is trying to do. Let's call it what it is.
So calling it a disease definitely gives the person a validation for what they're struggling with. But on the flip side, and it also helps us on Capitol Hill to get more funding, for example.
Yes.
But the concern of calling it a disease, some people would say, if we call it a disease, I'm never going to get a date, or I'm never going to get married, or nobody's ever going to want to hire me. And especially that one about getting hired. A disease sounds a whole lot more serious. And people fear that if they disclose anything about their personal health history that is damaging, that it's going to interfere with their ability to stay employed and be able to support themselves.
I mean, that's, in all honesty, a very valid concern. But people have been ducking and hiding about migraine, since, the 18th century. And we're getting nowhere. And I think we have to be bolder than that. We have to, the insanity is when you do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. And if we hide and we don't bring this thing out into the open, it'll never change. I think we need to be bold and patient with people, but accept that it may or may not work out very well. The first time or the second time that we come out of the closet, but we have to come out of the closet, or this will never stop and will continue to be stigmatized, underfunded, undertreated, and we won't get the treatments and cures that we need.
And if we don't call it a disease, then the amount of protection that we can get in the workplace is also going to be diminished.
Yeah, I think that's very true.
It is, in the United States at least, for those listeners who are in the U.S., it is chronic migraine is covered under the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, and you cannot be fired because of it. But general episodic migraine doesn't get the same protection. Is that right?
I haven't had problems. Most of my patients are using chronic migraine, but I think that people can get FMLA regardless, so long as we call it a chronic condition. Remember that the term chronic migraine in the International Classification of Headache Diseases has a specific meaning, but in the English language it means a chronic disease, and even episodic migraine is a chronic disease. And so you get FMLA for a chronic disease.
Good. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. So which words would you like to ban from popular use?
I would like to ban migraines, migraine headache, migraineur, migraine sufferer, migraine type person, and I'd like to ban medication overuse headache.
Migraines, just to add the caveat to it, can be used in certain circumstances when it's used to describe the plural of the attacks, but not as in I have migraines. So call the disease migraine. Don't call the disease migraines.
Exactly.
Okay, good. And we invite people to comment on this. That's often where some of the richest debate and understanding occurs. So which words most accurately describe migraine?
Migraine, I think disease, at least for most of my patients, is the most accurate term. Migraine and migraine attack. And I would use the headache of migraine, and I would use person with migraine. And I recognize that it's not accurate, but I would use rebound headache, not medication overuse headache.
What's the problem with the word sufferer?
Sufferer is something that is internal, and it's really not my business to tell anybody else that they're suffering. I could say that about myself, I'm really suffering today, but I don't want to be viewed by other people in general as a sufferer. I want people to see, the strong parts about me, the good parts about me. I think it's belittling and wrong to call someone a sufferer.
And pain is real, but suffering is optional, right?
Yes.
How about the word headache?
I think it's one little part of migraine, and then you should say the headache of migraine. But if you say migraine headache, you're discounting the importance of all those other symptoms that make migraine, such a burden and are, overall at least as important as the pain. So I think it's a mistake to leave that in when it's just a part and you're not including everything else. So just say migraine.
Just say migraine. You heard it here first. If you'd like to learn more about Dr. Young's work about fighting migraine with words, you can learn more on the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy website and the Miles for Migraine website. And we'll include links to both of those, along with some information about Headache on the Hill in the show notes on migraineagain.com. So thank you, Dr. Young, for your continued advocacy for people with migraine. We so appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And if you'd like to see Dr. Young, instead of just listen to his words in the podcast, don't miss his talk on the Migraine World Summit. It's on breaking the vicious cycle of chronic migraine, and it's a must-watch for anyone experiencing attacks several days each month. And check it out at migraineworldsummit.com.
And Paula, with that, it's time to move to the listener question and answers segment of the program. And today's question comes from Sarah, who writes to say, I'm trying my best to hold down my job, but most of my attacks start at work. I can't keep calling out sick, so what can I do to manage a migraine at work?
Sarah, that's a great question, and it is not uncommon at all. It's a pretty frequent dilemma in the migraine community. And sometimes going out to get a latte is not enough to knock out your migraine pain, and you need to stay at work. So how do you do that? Well, there are 7 strategies that we outline that can help you manage a migraine at work. First of all, do not advertise. Until we diminish the stigma of migraine, there's still a lot of misperceptions about migraine out there. People who think it's just a bad headache or you're just stressed out. And we know that it's not that. But it's hard to educate all by yourself. I would just encourage you, don't advertise. You're going to share selectively with people who have a need to know, like maybe your assistant or your boss or HR, but not everybody. Then control your environment. There's a whole lot that you can do to create your own accommodations without setting off red flags, like unscrewing a fluorescent bulb above your cubicle or hiding an odor-neutralizing sachet. I can't tell you how many people write in and say, the guy in the cubicle next to me wears too much cologne and it's driving me crazy and triggering my attacks. That's a problem. You can get noise-canceling earphones. It's no longer unacceptable to have headphones in while you're at your desk. If you have a desk job, it's not going to work if you're in a retail or healthcare job, but it might work if you had a desk job. So those are the kinds of things. Then either move the water cooler or get as close to it as you can, because hydrate, hydrate, hydrate. If you're like me, some days you get so busy you forget. I actually had to set an alarm on my phone to remind myself to drink more water, drink more water, drink more water, and then measure how much I was drinking. Those are simple things that you can do at work. You probably have a BFF. It's also really helpful to have a BMF, a best migraine friend. And for me, this has been somebody who knows that I get attacks and can help cover my work or cover for me when I just have to go home or when I'm sitting upright but I can't really get anything done. So it really helps to have someone like that who maybe can support you if you might need a ride home and it's not safe to drive. That would be helpful. Then understand disability, and you might be a candidate for disability depending on the frequency of your attacks. And maybe you're suffering at work unnecessarily and it's time to take either a leave from work or go on disability. Both of those are possibilities that almost everyone with chronic migraine has considered. And then don't delay. And this is really important. A lot of us think, oh gosh, if I could just get to 5 o'clock or whatever your 5 o'clock is, and treat this attack. But the reality is the longer you wait to treat that attack, the worse it's going to get. So try to treat it with something that will keep the symptoms from accelerating. Slow down that migraine mechanism that's going on in your body so that it doesn't overwhelm you and disable you from driving home. So There are a bunch of things that I hope can help you. There's a whole section on migraineagain.com about work and a bunch of articles that can help people who are dealing with other work-related issues. So I encourage you to check those out. Sarah, thank you so much for your question. It's an important one. And thank you for listening today. We're glad to spend this time with you. I'm Paula Dumas, wishing you all a pain-free day.
Thanks for spending part of your day with us. We hope that you feel encouraged and empowered in your battle against migraine because you deserve better. If you want to suffer less and live more despite migraine, be sure to check out all the great resources on migraineagain.com. Follow us on your favorite social network and subscribe to our free newsletter and this program. If you enjoyed today's episode, tell a friend about it and be sure and join us again next time on Migraine Again. You'll be glad you did.